Good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to Undermine Propaganda. My name is Lisa. It is July 6th, 2026, the Monday after 4th of July. And I don't know about you, but I was annoyed listening to explosion after explosion after explosion, Saturday and Sunday. And so was my dog. I never understood the fascination with blowing things up all weekend long, but that's just me. On a more important note, I was thinking a lot to myself, what are we celebrating? What are those people celebrating? Like, when you really think about it, are we celebrating the genocide that we are a part of an indigenous people in the Middle East, the Palestinians? Are we celebrating being part of starving children over there? Are we celebrating an illegal war that we started and ran against a sovereign country that did not attack us? Against the 160, are we celebrating the 160 mostly girls that we killed at the beginning of the war back in March? Are we celebrating the destruction of the last vestiges of the tiny, inadequate social safety net that we had here in America, so that now children will starve in America because we would rather give our resources to a billionaire so they can buy another yacht? Is that what we're celebrating? Are we celebrating forcing a 12-year-old child now who is raped to give birth to that child, regardless of what it does to her body, her mind, and her soul? Are we celebrating the fact that someone who gets cancer in the United States can go bankrupt trying to get treatment so that they can live? Are we celebrating the fact that they'll die because a lot of people can't get treatment at all in the richest country in the world, in the richest country in history? That being said, I felt like I was going insane listening to everyone around me in my neighborhood celebrate a country that is part of those things that I just described. Celebrating a country whose founding mission was established on the back of Black Americans that they forced over here so that they could extract their labor and steal their freedom. A country whose foundation was built upon yet another genocide of the indigenous people here in America. Are we celebrating those things, or are we ready finally to get to some truth about who we are and actually work towards the ideals of some of the things in our Constitution? Because we never, ever really work towards that. And in an interview this weekend on Al Jazeera, Chris Hedges really lays that out well. Phenomenal author, fierce advocate for human rights. So many great books. I can't name them all. America, the Farewell Tour comes to mind. American Fascist and the Christian Right comes to mind. Empire of Illusion comes to mind. Just there's so many. And he is phenomenal. He used to work for the New York Times, Pulitzer Prize winning journalist, foreign war correspondent. So he's seen what other countries look like as they are imploding and being destroyed from the inside out. He's seen what our wars do to other countries all over the world. So he's very articulate, very intelligent. His ethics are beyond reproach. Let's go ahead and take a look at what Chris Hedges thinks about America and the myth of American exceptionalism here on Al Jazeera this weekend. Okay, let's go ahead and take a look at this interview with Chris Hedges.
Chris Hedges, a very, very warm welcome to Talks at Al Jazeera. You've said in several discussions in the past that asking the right question is essential to finding the truth. I wonder what questions you hope Americans are asking of themselves and their country on this anniversary.
They're not asking the right questions, which is what happened to our country. We still imbibe, I think this is as true for the left as the right, on the myth of America, that somehow we live in a democracy, that somehow our democratic institutions function. As you know, I spent 20 years overseas covering all sorts of dictatorships from Augusto Pinochet's Chile to Saddam Hussein's Iraq, so perhaps it's easier for me to see the science. But it's over. The impediments to an authoritarian state no longer exist. And they're not confronting that reality.
Okay, Chris, I mean, the First Amendment guarantees the freedom to question power without fear. I mean, do you believe that principle, it sounds like you don't believe this, but in any way is being upheld here in the United States?
Well, the process of consolidating a dictatorship is not instantaneous. First, you hollow out the institutions, which is what neoliberalism, or let's call it by its more proper name, cutthroat capitalism, did. So Trump is the symptom. He's not the disease. He's what comes when a restive population begins to realize they've been conned, they've been fleeced. 30 million Americans lost their jobs in mass layoffs because of deindustrialization. This was a bipartisan project. The capturing of the courts, we see it.
And exactly, he really points something out there that's important, because there's so many people that I hear and even that I know personally who I think still believe in the myth, since we're talking about myths, the myth that if Trump were just gone, if the Republican administration was gone, if we just had a Democratic majority, then everything would be okay. But as Chris points out here, Trump is a symptom. He is a symptom of a system that created him and made the ground fertile for him. All the administrations, both Republican and Democrat, have gotten us to this point. They both have stripped away social safety nets. Ever since FDR's agenda was passed, there was a concerted movement, successful effort to roll back everything that had given us as a population. All the worker rights, unions have been decimated, and unions were not just decimated by the Republicans. Clinton and many other Democratic administrations have done exactly that. They have stripped away rights from workers. They have stripped away social safety nets. They have perpetuated foreign wars. They have used all of our resources, funneled them to the top here in America, and then used them to plunder the globe in support of enriching all the corporations and all, like I said, all the elites, and making it so a handful of people control everything and get everything. So yeah, Trump is not the problem. He is a symptom of, and until all Americans really grapple with that fact, or at least a big enough chunk of Americans grapple with that fact, we aren't going to be able to change the world that we're living in. And I mean world, not country, because we are so powerful as America with our military strength and ability and control over the monetary system that we control the globe right now. And if we could change America, we could change the world.
It with the removal of federal judges. We see it with the Supreme Court, probably the most reactionary court in American history. We see it with the shutting down of free speech on college campuses. Of course, I'm talking about the encampments that questioned the genocide, the not just the suspension and expulsion of students, but even professors. So the walls are clearly closing in.
Chris, let's circle back to the issue of freedom of speech, because your detractors would say that a truly autocratic state doesn't let an articulate critic like yourself, for instance, monetize that criticism on Substack, for instance. I mean, there's a difference between a flawed democracy, which is what you appear to be describing, and an autocratic state, surely.
I'm describing a process, so we're not there yet. We're moving very quickly in that direction. It's with the flick of a switch, you can create civic death. By that, I mean you demonetize. That's what happened to Julian Assange. Julian Assange is in Sweden, and suddenly his bank account is frozen, his ATM cards don't work. So there already is a policing. And we see that with the shadow banning, with the control, the consolidation of social media platforms, and the fusion of those platforms with the security and surveillance state.
Well, let's move away, though, from media ownership, because I want to stay focused on the foundational core here, Chris. I mean, is the text of the First Amendment itself, is the text failing, or are people failing to use the power embedded within that text?
No, what's failed is the mechanism, the judicial mechanisms by which free speech was once upheld. I mean, for instance, there was an article in the New York Times the other day, front page story, about all of the machinations the Trump White House is using to fix the midterm elections. But let's say the Democrats win. Who's going to enforce? If there's some kind of an impeachment, if Trump is held accountable under the Emoluments Clause. So the problem is the enforcement mechanism. And the last readout that those of us who care about an open society have is the judicial system, and that is becoming rapidly reconfigured. Again, that follows a pattern in many of the countries that I reported from.
And that's the thing right there, too, that's actually terrifying. It's like I was just saying, even if the Democrats won a supermajority and no Republicans were in power at all, one, you have the Democratic establishment, which is aligned with the Republicans. They're one elite corporate machine that will continue to perpetuate war across the globe, will continue to strip away social safety nets, will continue to enrich the elite. It's not just that. There is this, I was talking with a friend of mine, and there is this movement that you can see, you can feel. It's exciting. It encourages hope, a movement of democratic socialism. All these candidates that are now legitimately and authentically calling for the end of these wars, the end of these genocides, Medicare for all, a living wage, free college, all these things that other countries have, by the way. So it's not what they try to tell you in corporate media that, oh, we can't do it. That's just so far left. Every country, every developed country in the world has some form of universal health care. Every country in the world has, just about every developed country in the world has free higher education. These things that we don't have, we are the outlier. We are, they aren't. So like, undermine propaganda is my channel name. That's propaganda. So Chris is like pointing out something really important here. And this is what, like, I was get back to when I talked to my friends about the hopefulness of this DSA movement. But I'm like, wait a minute, the whole entire judicial system, these people have been working on this project to unroll all these things from FDR that would help the civilization, that would help the population. And they've been unrolling this because they want complete control over the population. They want to immiserate us so they can control us. And they've placed judges in positions to make sure that they can continue with this project of unraveling any type of social safety net, any kind of protest against these foreign wars. And you look at the Supreme Court and they have succeeded. Look at what the Supreme Court has done. The Supreme Court, no matter what things happen with whoever gets into Congress, if it goes to the Supreme Court, they're just going to strike it down. And that is the fear. And that Chris points that out, that that last guardrail that would help us have some form of even just this sliver of democracy has been dismantled and is, if it even is anymore, is hanging on by a thread.
Chris, I was taken by something else you've been talking about very widely that's pertinent perhaps to these 4th of July celebrations. You've suggested that American society has increasingly substituted spectacle for reality and is experiencing deep structural decline. You've already touched upon that. Can you help us understand what you mean by that? The whole idea of spectacle for reality.
Right. So let's take the Democratic Party, for instance. The Democratic Party does not function as a traditional political party. Its base has absolutely no say in what the hierarchy, and first of all, Biden, remember, never ran against an opponent in the primaries. Then when they realized they were going to get shellacked, he was summarily removed, and Kamala Harris was anointed. Nobody voted for her. 77% of Democrats oppose weapon shipments to Israel to stop the genocide. It doesn't matter. And so that's what I mean by spectacle. You have political parties that function as spectacle. The same is true with the Republican Party under Trump, which functions now primarily as a cult.
Do you see the 4th of July celebrations themselves as an extension of that spectacle? Somehow a way of distracting the population from the ills within?
No, because of course what happened is you had a bipartisan commission that was overseeing the 250th anniversary, and this got hijacked by Trump. So it became, it didn't become a spectacle by which we would honor the country or the values of the country such as they are, but it became a kind of vanity project for the Trump White House. Well, that of course only fosters or widens the divisions within the society and alienates roughly half the population that detests Trump.
You clearly are not letting the entire political establishment off the hook. But, I mean, let's move beyond the fact that this is just a Trumpian spectacle, because are we missing the point when we attach such a profound critique of America right now on one man?
Well, I don't have my critique on one man. I mean, I think if Trump disappeared tomorrow, we would still...
I hate the way this guy keeps doing this. He's like taking something Chris said and completely reframing it to something he didn't say. Is it fair to put the spectacle of America and the flaws of America on one man? Chris just went through the fact that it's a myth, that it's in the entire establishment, that the fact that if you didn't have Trump in office, we would have the same problems, that Trump is but a symptom. And then this guy still reframes it and says, is it fair to blame it on one man? No, that's not what he said. Not what he said.
But somebody else would take his place. That what we saw, and I wrote a book probably at this point almost 2 decades ago called American Fascists, the Christian Right, and the War on America. I was inside these megachurches. I spent 2 years on it. And I watched how these megapastors preyed on the despair of Americans who had been disenfranchised or dispossessed within their own country. And so the conclusion of that book was we're not going to argue people out of magical thinking. We're not going to argue them out of creationism. We've got to re-enfranchise them economically back into the society.
Chris, there's a lot of deconstruction here, but I feel like we need to find a little bit to construct some hope from. I mean, it's all good and well to suppose diagnose the rot, but where are the solutions here? And I'm keen to focus on the American Constitution and its capacity potentially to self-correct, because you argue that real progress only comes from radical movements like abolitionists, like the US Civil Rights Movement. But is it fair to say that
thinking, we're not going to argue them out of creationism, we've got to re-enfranchise them economically back into the society?
Chris, there's a lot of deconstruction here, but I feel like we need to find a little bit to construct some hope from. I mean, it's all good and well to suppose diagnose the rot, but where are the solutions here? And I'm keen to focus on the American Constitution and its capacity potentially to self-correct, because you argue that real progress only comes from radical movements like abolitionists, like the US Civil Rights Movement. But is it fair to say that those movements succeed here in the US because the founding fathers created institutions that have given rise to abolition, civil rights? What I'm saying is, did they create the bedrock by which the nation can perpetually self-correct as it goes along?
No. They created a nation that was the exclusive domain of white male slaveholders. Remember, it just wasn't women, African Americans, Native Americans who were disenfranchised, but men without property. Originally, the senators were appointed because they passed most of the legislation. They're in for longer terms. And you go back to the Federalist Papers, and there was a real fear of popular democracy. And that's what they were pushing against, that Thomas Paine type democracy.
You're describing a kind of...
And that was, great points there by Chris, too. It's a lot of people go back to the Constitution. Every man is created equal. And look at the foundation. I mean, they made the foundation on the fact that every man is created equal. And as Chris points out here, the foundation itself was a lie in that every man wasn't. Every white Christian heterosexual man property owner. That's one tiny segment of society, and everyone else was not. Black people obviously were not. Women obviously were not. Gay people obviously were not. It was white, male, Christian property owner, straight. That's it. Every man created equal, as Chris points out here. That in and of itself was just a lie. So there wasn't even that framework. So the fact that the civil rights movements and suffrage movement, all these movements to gain any rights at all happened was, I believe, in spite of, not because of the founders of America. It was in spite of, because they never wanted that to happen. And so many people lost their lives and their livelihoods because of those movements. To give me the right to vote as a woman, so many people lost their lives because the powers that be didn't want me to have that right. And there are many people at this point in time that no longer want people like me to have that right, or people like you. So great point again by Chris, pushing back on, I don't know who this guy is. I really don't know who this interviewer is, but I wouldn't be surprised if he was just some American establishment person in some form or another, because he frames these questions and stuff just like CNN or Fox would.
18th century oligarchy. I wonder then why grassroots civil rights movements like No Kings are using language taken straight from the Declaration.
Well, they use the language, but that all men are created equal when it was written was just factually not correct. If you were an African American, you were not created equal. If you were a Native American, you were not created equal. So yes, they're using the language to essentially turn it on itself. That's what Martin Luther King did very, very well. But all of the openings of American democracy, Howard Zinn writes about this in A People's History of the United States, came from movements. And remember, the United States, in terms of the labor movement, we had the bloodiest labor wars of any industrialized country. Hundreds of American workers were killed. Tens of thousands were blacklisted. So those openings came from the abolitionists, from the suffragists, but they fought against the system. And now the system, which has done a very good job in this kind of a reaction to the rise of popular movements in the 1970s, you get the Powell Memo of 1971, they rolled everything backwards, and in particular unions, because only about 10% of the American workforce is unionized, and about 6% of that are public sector employees who are denied the right to strike, which is, of course, is the one weapon that workers have to push back against the machinery of government and commerce.
And you clearly don't believe that in any way the establishment was designed to correct itself as time goes by. And I guess one very obvious way in which that starkly presents itself in modern America is when it comes to gun ownership. Of course, the Second Amendment, right to bear arms. There are 500 to 700 mass shootings a year. The vast majority of Americans, we understand, would prefer sensible gun ownership laws. I mean, I suppose if a 250-year-old document
quality.
Let's talk war, something you know intimately. I mean, you won a Pulitzer Prize reporting on the horrors of war. Now, of course, following the US-Iran war, we appear to be sliding into a more fractured, multipolar world. I mean, if the US goes ahead, for whatever reason, in slashing its military footprint in the Middle East, in retreating, as you advocate, I understand, I mean, doesn't that leave a massive, potentially bloody vacuum in the world?
No, I think if you look at the last 3 decades in the Middle East.
Okay, I'm sorry. But again, this guy. Well, if America withdraws, won't it leave a bloody vacuum? We create the blood and suffering and chaos and destruction and currently are. This guy is advocating, or I'd say advocating, but posing the question that if we withdraw from the Middle East, which we should have never fucking been there to begin with, if we withdraw from the Middle East, that it will leave a bloody vacuum? What? Okay. Anyway, let's let Chris handle this answer, who is far more equipped to do so than I am.
East, the extension or the footprint of the American military has created instability, not to mention tremendous suffering in countries like Iraq, Afghanistan, Syria, Libya, and now Iran. But declining empires engage in military adventurism. I studied classics. That's what the Athenian Empire did. That's what the Roman Empire did. They engage in military adventurism, foolish military adventurism, to try and recapture a lost hegemony, and that's precisely what the United States is doing, and Trump isn't the first to do it. I mean, the Republicans and Democrats did that with Iraq. They did that with Afghanistan. But unfortunately, there's no self-corrective process. Those who orchestrated and oversaw those debacles are not held to account. The way you could say did happen after the Vietnam War. These people are still in power. The neocons who push these wars are still on the cable news networks and still in their think tanks, even though they've just led us from disaster to disaster.
As a classicist, you'll know, of course, Xi Jinping mentioned the Thucydides trap recently. Right. You know, this whole concept of a declining power clashing against an emerging power, that it is a historical inevitability, as we saw between Sparta and the Athenians in ancient times. If America steps back, don't you trigger that trap? I mean, don't you hand Taiwan to China? Do you not hand Eastern Europe to Russia?
No, because I think there was a historical process whereby a series of bad judgments create. I mean, you know, just as the slaughter of the Palestinians, it did not begin, you know, we can't begin history on October 7th. You have to look at the expansion of NATO. You know, I was in East Germany for the unification of Germany, and I was there when the German foreign minister, Hans-Dietrich Genscher and James Baker, promised Gorbachev, because people forget Germany was not allowed to be unified unless it had unless it was approved by the Soviet Union.
And Chris just brought up something there a couple lines before where he's at now, but that's another thing we do. I mean, to frame the narrative, make us look like the good guys or Israel look like the good guys. But we start history where we want to start it. Like we start history with Palestine on October 7th, 2023, to argue that the Hamas attacked Israel. The word they will use is unprovoked. And then we do the same thing with Iran. With Iran, well, they were going to get a nuclear weapon and then they were going to kill us all. You know, they have this thing where they're trying to create a nuclear weapon and they're a danger to Americans and to Israel. But we don't go back. You go back to 1953, where we attacked them and we overthrew their democratically elected government in Iran, so that our big corporations and Britain's big corporations, BP, British Petroleum, could have access to their resources, because they had elected democratically again a leader who wanted to nationalize their oil for his people. And we weren't about to have that because we want to control the entire world. So we attacked them and overthrew their government. So, you know, a great point here again by Chris, you know, showing how to create that narrative, we want to state when history started in a certain conflict or event, when really we leave out this big context. So the American people, you hear American people regurgitating well, it's okay, we're going to war with them because they have a nuclear weapon. They're terrorists. They're just these people that just want to attack us for no reason. They chant death to America because they're jealous of our way of life. What a fucking joke. No. Read history. We need to read more history. I need to keep educating myself more and more and more, because once you start learning the context and the history, these narratives that empire has thrown out all these years and continues to throw out really, really, really can't even stand on sand, because there's no factual and definitely no moral basis for it. So let's go ahead and listen to towards the end of this. I want to hear him talk about how we push back against this system. And there's another section too that I wanted to listen to Chris on here, because and I was just having this, I would call it a debate, just a discussion with somebody in the neighborhood on one of the apps that I'm on, because I usually don't get engaged in those, but sometimes I just get so frustrated with these talking points. But they're talking about how capitalism is the greatest system ever to exist. It's pulled more people out of poverty and into the middle class than any other system. And no other system works. Socialism always fails. It's just a failing system. Capitalism is the best system to ever exist. And just the fact that how it pulls all these people out of poverty and is just so, again, the context and the logic to it is so skewed. The facts to it are so skewed. The fact of the matter is that it's creating more poverty, intentionally creating more poverty to keep the population subservient so they don't fight back. And we are now in a second Gilded Age. More inequality now than there has been since the Gilded Age, before the Great Depression. So people actually, like in June and July of 2026 here in America, arguing for capitalism. The only people that are doing that are those that are benefiting from it, that want to be in denial about the truth. And the people that are suffering, which is the majority of Americans at this point, and the majority of people all over the world, because this is global capitalism. This isn't just America. But anyway, again, let's let Chris answer this question and see what he says about capitalism pulling more people out of poverty than any other system ever to exist.
American capitalism, if we may, because you trace inequality back to the Industrial Revolution and the growth of very powerful corporations. But for many Americans, they would say that, look, free markets, they've lifted billions of people out of poverty. Why burn the engine down instead of...
Okay, I'm sorry, I have to talk again, though. But again, there's another thing, too. This free market illusion, the free market myth. It is not a free market. When what these corporations do is create monopolies to push all other competitors away, so that they can then control prices on everything, is not a free market. To juice your stock by doing something that used to be illegal, by the way, until Ronald Reagan in the 80s made it legal, to buy back stock, to take the profits that you make and buy back stock to artificially inflate the price of, or the value of your company, is not a free market. To hire people in, and because you don't pay them a living wage, you hand them a form to fill out. So because they are capable of getting benefits because you pay them so little, they qualify for SNAP, they qualify for Medicaid, because your wage is not a living wage. It is so low that they qualify for SNAP that we have to subsidize, because that big corporation wants to use their profits not to create better product, not to pay their workers a living wage, but to do stock buybacks and pay their CEO millions upon millions upon millions of dollars a year. That is not a free market. There is not a free market in the United States. That is a myth, and it is a lie, and it's frustrating every time I hear somebody say that. Again, back to Chris, who answers much better than I.
Seeking to regulate it rigorously.
But that's not factually true. I mean, what lifted people out of poverty were unions, especially in the 1930s. The 8-hour workday, the end of child labor, the pensions, Social Security. That came from union activity. It didn't become. We didn't gain these rights or decent wages because of the beneficence of the capitalist class. It became possible within American society, certainly by the 1950s, as a worker. It's no longer true to have a middle class life. But that came from unions.
Again, we're coming back to this idea of sort of corporate oligarchs. I mean, let's look at the courts, because the Supreme Court stood firm, protected recently birthright citizenship under the 14th Amendment. I mean, if corporate oligarchs fully control the state today, how do you explain a ruling that explicitly protects some of the most marginalized in American society?
That amendment's pretty hard to get around. It's pretty black and white. So I don't know what else the Supreme Court was going to rule on that. On the other hand, they also have further extended the imperial powers of the Trump White House, this kind of unitary.
Okay, let me move ahead here real quick. Okay, there's another section here. I just wanted to play a little part of it where Chris is talking about how the state is getting even more aggressive in suppressing people's votes, or people's rights rather, and rights to protest. And he talks about the ICE detention facilities, and they're building them all over the country, and how basically if you think that's just for immigrants, you're very naive. Their surveillance state is getting to a point there's nowhere you can go and nothing you can do, that you're not being watched. And if you think that you have privacy anymore, you are also sadly mistaken and naive. And the interviewer, once again, just says something just stupid, honestly. Ignorant, we'll say ignorant. Whether it's intentionally ignorant or truly ignorant, I don't know. I'm not in his head. But he just says something stupid about, well, if you can protest, doesn't that mean you have a democracy and you have all these rights? And Chris just completely shatters that ignorant statement here.
Naive.
I'm curious about those who have put themselves in harm's way to stand against those injustices, ICE, etc. I mean, isn't that absolutely symptomatic of the bedrock of what it means to be American, to stand up against injustice, all of the things that are from the outset embedded in the early declarations of the Constitution?
Yes, and look what's happened to them. I mean, they're criminalizing the photographing of ICE abuses. They killed 2 American citizens on the streets of Minneapolis. They just gave these draconian prison sentences in Texas to these ICE protesters, up to 30 and 50 years. So we are seeing, the whole criminalization of Antifa. I mean, what is Antifa? It's this amorphous, the demonization of the so-called radical left. So yes, civil disobedience. Civil disobedience has never been embraced by the ruling elite, but it's been an important part of the American project as expressed by everyone from Frederick Douglass to Thoreau. But you're really seeing a concerted effort, not just to shut down voices, we're seeing that especially over the genocide, but really to physically go after those people who are attempting to push back against this fascist project.
Can you give me one concrete historical model that you would actually replace modern America with if you could?
It's not so much that I would replace modern America with another historical model. I mean, I happen to be a socialist.
Why is socialism, the name socialist, become such a kind of toxic, dirty word from the political right at the moment? It seems to be the best way of unpicking one's opponent, irrespective of whether they are socialist or not.
Yeah, because again, that gets into the whole burlesque of the American media system. It's all sound bites. I come out of the traditional media. I spent 15 years at the New York Times. The degradation of the media is quite depressing. It's trivia and empty, and there's nothing of depth. So socialism, we had many. Social security is socialism. Universal health care is socialism, and the ability of the country to care for the most vulnerable. I mean, when Social Security was put into place, I forget the numbers, but significant numbers of elderly people in this country were literally starving. And so the rolling back of those programs, and the capitalist class has made war on those programs almost since their inception.
Another slur that you often hear is to be accused of being unpatriotic. I wonder, can love of country, can patriotism, can it exist at the same time as contempt, criticism of the country's history and its past wrongs?
If you can't criticize the past, if you can't deconstruct the past, then you can't build a better future. So the retreat into myth is, again, the intellectual and spiritual calcification of the society. And it is that ability.
Spiritual calcification of society. Boy, I love that line. And again, the interviewer, I'm sorry. I don't know who you are. I should have looked up your name. I don't think it really matters. Is it really patriotic to criticize? Is it really patriotic? Really? It is our duty. It is our duty as citizens to criticize, fight against the immorality and lack of ethics and the destruction and decay of those in power that are pushing upon all of us. It is our duty. And like he says, spiritual decalcification. And I mean, or spiritual calcification. It is our duty. And that is another thing too. If you don't, there is all kinds of pundits this weekend. Well, you're not patriotic. Even on Piers Morgan. Aren't you patriotic? Don't you love America? Can you say you're patriotic? And I just think almost like to a point now we're seeing the American flag. It just makes me think that person, is that a person that believes that you should not criticize slavery, that you should not criticize genocide? Is that what that person thinks? And that's not necessarily true. But it's gotten to a point where being patriotic to a lot of people means what this guy just said. Is it really patriotic to criticize America? Yes, it is. And that is ridiculous to say that it's not patriotic to criticize America. I live here. This is my home. I pay taxes to what's supposed to be a project of a great, wonderful, moral country built on ethics. It's in and these things are in my name. This genocide in Palestine is in my name. What we're doing in Iran's in my name. We don't have just a right. We have a duty to criticize and speak out about these things.
Ability to constantly re-examine ourselves that allows us to go forward and build a better society. And that's something that all fascist movements seek to shut down.
All nations have founding myths that bring countries together, particularly in times of upheaval. No?
Yes, and they're all untrue. And I think part of the role of an intellectual or a historian is to uncover the truth. And sometimes it takes a very long time. Lynching in the United States would be a pretty good example.
Chris, let me ask you this, of course, on that last point. I mean, if you were standing in a stadium right now, packed to the rafters with enthusiastic 20-year-olds, what is the single constructive lesson from the last 250 years that you want them to carry forward? Or would you just simply tell everyone to get up and leave?
No, I would say mass movements, organizing through nonviolence, to shut down the machinery of commerce and the machinery of state are the one mechanism we have, because we have numbers, by which we can push back against what's happening to us. I'm a strong supporter of Extinction Rebellion. They shut down the M25 motorway for 4 days around London. They got very long, so I guess that was just
People want quiet, simple lives. They don't want upheaval staring them in the face, though.
Yes, but quiet, simple lives at this point are going to mean that by the time we wake up, it's too late.
Chris, it's been an absolute pleasure talking to you, author, journalist, commentator.
And there it is. And boy, what a way to end. Don't people want quiet, peaceful lives? And if we keep wanting quiet, peaceful lives and no discomfort, the whole point of movements is to create discomfort. Chris is very nonviolent, and I tend to lean that way too. We live in a very violent country. To try to do a violent uprising, I mean, we're outmanned as far as weapons. I mean, we have to be logical with that. But I do often, all the time, think about, what can we do to fight back? And not just by electing DSA candidates. That's great. That's wonderful. That's a movement in the right direction. It gives me hope. But I just don't feel like it's enough. I feel like we are so deep in this that if we don't do some major things in the very near future, like right now, honestly, that we are going to descend completely into fascism, completely into a state, a country where we won't be able to make any movements in any directions because we're so surveilled and so under restrictions that there will be no way to fight back at all. He talks about mass movements there, and I agree with that. It's like, how do we get there? And what other ways? Boycotting and strikes. And they've gotten us in a position where it's so hard to do that without literally losing everything. And we have so little as far as mutual support and mutual aid and community left. I mean, we're like starting all over again. But please let me know what you think of Chris Hedges, what you think of that interview, what you think of 4th of July, what you think of patriotism. And something I really want to learn more and understand and hear from people about, what can we do to fight back and change this system? Like tangible steps moving in that direction. What can we do as a collective? Because we aren't doing it individually. That's what we've done all these years, as everything's been in an individual way, and it gets us nowhere. It got us here. So what do we do collectively? Anybody that's listening, please let me know your thoughts. I am very curious, very interested. I would like to learn and expand how I think and how I look at these things. So I appreciate any feedback whatsoever. Also, subscribe. It's free, guys. I try to do a couple videos a week, as much as I can, over some issues that seem really, really important to this time that we're in. I appreciate all of you. Again, like the video, subscribe. It is free. And I will talk to you guys all soon. And I don't ever want to forget to say, I hope you guys find some peace in the rest of your day. Thank you so much, guys. See you later.